Well, good afternoon, everybody. Marty Keller here in Sacramento, and I'm joined here in Sacramento by John Donovan, who is in town doing some visiting. It's great to actually be with you physically, John. And we'd like to welcome one of my longest term friends, oldest in terms of duration, not quite necessarily in terms of age, my friend Ron Kastner, who is coming to us from Manhattan. Who also spends a lot of his time in London. So we're happy to welcome our very first international jet setter to the podcast. So welcome, Ron.
Maybe in the old days.
For sure. Yeah.
Not so much now.
Says the guy who just landed from London a couple of days ago, but that's okay.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we are very eager to share some time with Ron is that Ron is in the process of writing and hopefully soon publishing a book on how to live the last years of our lives, the sunset, the twilight, whatever you want to call it, with power and intention and health. And Ron has been in dialogue with me about these issues for a number of years, and then I had the opportunity to introduce John and him. And Ron actually hosted John when he went to London a couple of years ago to participate in a European ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics Conference. So, and Ron also helped get the video of John's history and the development of the accountability practice that's on John's website. So the three of us have collaborated for a long time, but this is actually the first time that we're together in a conversation, the three of us. So this is kind of a fun thing for all of us.
Yep,
it is. Yeah.
So I'd like to maybe start by asking Ron if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit about, first of all, just how did you conceive of this book? And then maybe after you tell us that, a little bit of that, we can talk about sort of the evolution of your thinking about what's important for having a powerful last several decades of life.
Well, it started out about, I'm 71 now, so it started out about 12 or 13 years ago. In past life, I was a businessman and a theater producer and led a pretty active professional life. And sort of in the midst of that, it was a very turbulent period too. It was 2008, so there was a financial crisis and all this other stuff. I just got hit by a bolt of lightning that seemed to be the product of a few things that were occurring in my life right then. And they were all catalyzed by buying a book that I bought before a short train ride on my way to a business meeting. And the book was Dr. Oz's, it was called The Owner's Manual for Extending Your Warranty on Your Life, you know. And it was all about medical stuff and this, that, and the other thing. And I was 58, 57, 58. And I just had I had a 6-month-old daughter and a 2.5-year-old daughter. And I was a late dad. I'm a late dad. And it just stopped me in my tracks. I had never thought about the fact that I was approaching 60 years old and that this was I was entering the last period of my life. And it could be long and healthy, and it could be short. My parents both died. My mother died when she was 55. My father died when he was 47. So I have a really bad history with that. My father died when I was 7. So I said to myself, the last thing in the world that I ever want to do to my daughters is leave them like I was left. So at that point, I just sort of, I vowed to myself, this is really important. And I started, it was a long, gradual thing, but I started doing research into traditional physical health, exercise, diet, what could be done. I read, probably a couple hundred books, over the course of the next few years. I started experimenting with myself, with detox, with gyms, with this, with that, whatever. And all of which paid off. I mean, I became very fit, and I thought I became healthy. And, the doctors were all telling me you're in great shape, and blood tests came back okay, and blah, 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 blah. But it was all in the physical realm. And then at a certain point along the way, and I was a very involved, active dad, incredibly active, even though I got divorced, later on. I stayed that way. I still am. I have 2 teenage daughters now who I love more than anything. And at a certain point along the way, I mean, you can't do this stuff and experience your body and experience the emotions that come with living an internal physical life without changing and without it becoming a more emotional presence. But even more than that is I started appreciating the force and the power and the spirit that created us to begin with, and the fact that this is a giant, that we are these magnificent, magnificent machines, that, that a sacred, celestial, whatever force or spirit, higher power you want to call it, created and evolved over billions of years. And that's me, and when I thought about it that way, all kinds of self-worth and self-benevolence and camaraderie with the universe and all kinds of other things start coming into play. And I found myself in a world of spirit and religion and psychotherapy and emotional truth coming out of my body and everything else. And it has just evolved into a bigger, unified, integrated view and experience of life in general. I mean, I think that's probably, I could go on talking about this forever, but I think that I should probably end there and let's get into a little discussion about it. Or if you have any questions about it, that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, your mic's on. There you go, Marty.
Thanks for that brief overview. I appreciate that. And as I mentioned, Ron and I have been chatting weekly for a number of years now, so I know there's a lot more that's involved, and I've had the pleasure and joy of sometimes suffering along with you as you've been exploring the different right-hand turns, left-hand turns, ups, downs, etc.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge, if I could, the fact that one of the, I think, most powerful things that you did with respect to deciding to put your thoughts down on paper was, as you said a minute ago, everything that you have been bringing to this is from your own experience.
Yeah.
That you've explored what others may have suggested or what others may have also experienced and shared, but your work is the product of your own direct experience.
Yeah. And the thing I find missing from most of the health medical dialogue and advice out there, which is myriad, by the way. I mean, there's two aspects of it. One is that we're not inventing the wheel here. The health practices are traditional. They've been practiced by traditional cultures for thousands of years. You know, yoga is a perfect example. It is a wonderful practice to do. It's 2.5 to 3,000 years old. Movement is not, we haven't invented it, you know, all that stuff, all the stuff that, but modern life teaches us all kinds of things. And we've trapped ourselves in a comfort zone where the comfort of eating prepared food, which is not necessarily healthy for us, and the comfort of not having to move for many things impacts our health a great deal. But the other thing is that the emotional connection to disease and the emotional connection to sickness is something that is wildly overlooked by the medical community. They just don't want to go there, you know. So there are some psychoanalysts and some psychotherapists who will embrace that stuff, and there's an increasing body of integrative medicine that will acknowledge that there is an emotional connection to things. But my work has shown that it is right here and right now, and this is where it dovetails with a lot of the stuff that John does. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, how we met, you introduced us because John had a medical episode and you heard my story, and we talked about, that, and the emotional stuff and the emotional connections to any kind of physical ailment or physical, and if emotions can cause ailments, they can also cause health. You know, it's a two-way street. Yeah, it's a two-way street. So staying healthy is a much bigger picture than just, you know, going to the gym and exercising and eating the right foods and this, that, the other thing. It's a big overall integrated picture that involves emotional and spiritual life as well.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Very much so. When I started my journey, recovery, mine was in a 12-step. As I was in it, I became a massage, acupressure massage therapist. And I learned the traditional Chinese 5-element theory, and it has to do with every part of your body, every organ is attached to a feeling, emotional tone. And when those are imbalanced, the body comes in balance. And you could touch one and it affects the other. So if you, like your story is you touched the physical and it affected the emotional, spiritual. My journey was touching the emotional, which affected the physical and spiritual.
Yeah. So,
yeah, it's all intertwined.
I mean, I'll give you a recent example from my life. I've been doing some stuff called somatic reexperiencing, and it's applied movement. It's just sort of moving spontaneously and getting at stuff, you know, and there's a lot of stuff in Joseph Campbell where, you know, the myths that we make up about things, the stories that we make up about things come from our emotional being, you know. Same can be said for psychotherapy. You know, the emotion generates a story, and you can also get at the emotion by telling the story. You know, it goes both ways.
Yes.
That's what free association is all about. You know,
Mhm.
you say the words and they're leading you to an emotion, you know, and and um, and the opposite is true. You can have the emotion and it leads, and that's what inspiration and writing and art is about, you know. So I have been doing this applied movement stuff, and I had this problem in my gut. It felt like it was in my gut, but it was in sort of around my solar plexus. And I've had it for years. It sort of comes and goes. There's just no rhyme or reason to it. I always thought it was something I ate, or it lasts a few days. Sometimes it lasts a week. Sometimes it lasts a couple hours, whatever. And I finally said, you know what? I sort of want to, I noticed that it was worse when I did a really hard workout, either in a gym or yoga or something like that. But I didn't know what it was. So I finally said, okay, this is the way I work with all of my health issues. I'm going to consult a medical doctor. I'm going to consult a psychotherapist. I'm going to consult this somatic movement person, this somatic re-experience person. I'm going to consult a personal trainer friend of mine, and I'm going to describe the symptoms to each of them and see what happens, you know. Well, the long story short, the one that made the most impact was the somatic re-experience thing, where what we came up with after just some closed-eyed, spontaneous movement, whatever happens, what does it feel like? You know, whatever happens, whatever it feels like. I realized that I hold an enormous amount of, this area for me holds an enormous amount of tension generally. And it affects my digestion. It probably affects my heart. It probably affects my all kinds of other stuff. And we were able to, with breathing and everything else, to relax it to a point where I realized that this was the place where I felt the most connected to the universe.
Wow.
Right there, right in my solar plexus.
Yeah.
And I felt this came, it was really, it's kind of spooky, you know, to say it this way, but I saw this green jewel in the middle of my solar plexus as the jewel with the many-faceted jewel that connects to everything, you know. And I now have a tool. Whenever I feel this thing, I go, okay, something's going on vis-a-vis my connection. It has nothing to do with digestion.
No.
It has nothing to do with what I ate. It has nothing
or
to do
muscle
with
tension.
It has nothing to do with how hard I trained or this, that. I can relieve it with breathing and connecting. And it goes away. It goes away. Or I stick with it for a while, and it you know, I can work with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something, it's not some sensation that comes out of nowhere and afflicts me. It's something I have a handle on, you know. And the other ones, you know, the other people had some, you know, the psychotherapist said, you know, there could be some anger stuff in there. There could be, well, yeah, there could be some anger that I feel deprived of not being connected to the universe. I want to be connected to the universe more, and I'm pissed off that I've lived all my life so far that without it, you know.
Yeah.
So there's all that, you know. So
Uh-huh.
that's kind of the way I work with the health issues, you know. I would have been just as open to a doctor saying, it's this. I've had a history with this with other people, but you know, but it didn't. He came, a matter of fact, he came back, the doctor came back and said, you know, a lot of this stuff is nerves.
Yeah. In other words, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
At least he was open enough to not
Yeah.
run diagnostics and, said you have GI issues and
Yeah.
IBS and all this other stuff. So.
Isn't that what they call in the medical profession, idiopathic diagnosis?
Yeah. I mean, we forget that placentas work as often, placebos rather. Placebos, placentas. Yeah, they're talk about the abdomen. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Placebos work. By the way, that's an adjunct to it. I was adopted at birth, so there's all sorts of issues with that. Inside. So, but placebos work as often as as regular drugs do, for the most part.
Yeah.
And many times better. So nobody wants to touch this stuff. Nobody wants to go there, or very few people do. There's a few books out. Marty and I talked about a couple of them. There's that emotional biology book. Is that what it was called?
Right.
Emotional molecule.
Molecules of Emotion, Candace
Yeah.
Pert.
There's one called Cure by
Cure.
Joe Marchant. I have another one in London. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a few of the Biology of Belief.
Yeah. Bruce Lipton.
And yeah, Andrew Weil wrote one called Spontaneous Healing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, if you can heal, I mean, healing to me is as basic a fundamental life force as there is. It infuses all of life. It's the same thing as evolution, because when you heal, usually you heal stronger than you were before.
Yeah.
And it's the body's way of learning how to cope with a situation, so it begs the question of, how, as Marty said in the beginning, how confronting the ups and downs and the challenges of life and the challenges of our internal lives is actually a therapeutic adventure, which makes us stronger,
Yeah.
And to a large degree, we just don't. We've been taught not to entertain that stuff. I just listened to the TED radio hour or something like that on NPR, and it was all about this stuff. It was all about grief and everybody having to be cheerful all the time, and and they were talking about the same stuff, and they're just saying, there's no such thing as good or bad with emotions. There's just feeling it, allowing yourself to feel it. It's all the same stuff so hopefully more and more and more people are thinking about this stuff and talking about this stuff. So, because it's really the true way I feel it's the true way to health and, whether that health is mental, spiritual, or physical.
And it's a matter of simply experiencing your aliveness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ron, when you were talking about that jewel,
yeah,
I had a similar experience recently where I was in a feeling of anxiety or dread. Something had happened between my daughter and I. And this feeling came on me. I know enough to know that it's family of origin, something from my past that's unhealed. So I actually went lay down on the bed, and I allowed the feeling. It was in my arms and my chest, and I just allowed the feeling. And my mind wanted me to go into a story about the feeling, and I kept bringing myself back. And what I got was that's the feeling of aliveness that the trauma had told me, don't do that because it'll be punished. So now I get this feeling in my arms, what I used to call anxiety, and what I heard you call, it's not an affliction, it's an invitation.
Right.
And it's incredible. And it's like, so the thing I'm afraid of the most, based on childhood trauma, is the feeling of being alive. And it just blew me away as another way to articulate this in a way that whether it makes sense or not, but it's actually my experience.
The tension was part of me trying to block being connected.
Yeah.
Trying to block me feeling good about myself.
Yes.
You know, and that's the battle right there.
Yeah.
It's all about self-benevolence, you know.
You know, you said it the during your opening comments that we're not inventing anything new. And it's very fascinating to me as I look through the history of the practices that led to accountability practice. I notice, for example, the church that I speak at, and a sister church that John belongs to from the American New Thought movement. And these guys figured out, this was started before the Civil War. These guys started to figure out, and gals, that they were sick because they thought they were. And they began a grand experiment with the process of changing their thoughts about their physical health to bring about a shift in their actual physical condition. And the Unity School that I belong to was founded by a woman named Myrtle Fillmore who had tuberculosis. And she heard a talk by one of these guys that came out of this original group. Phineas Quimby was the guy that started this, but one of his major students was Mary Baker Eddy, who went on to found Christian Science. And there were a number of people around her and Quimby and others. And so Myrtle Fillmore happened to hear this lecture, and she had this insight that I'm a child of God, so I don't inherit disease. God doesn't create disease. It's my belief that I'm diseased that creates it.
Right.
And so then she went on and spent the next year or so in a very disciplined fashion, essentially blessing every cell in her body and telling them that they were healthy and whole and vibrant. And I mean, imagine day after day after day doing this while her mind, like John's mind was in the story he just said, her mind must have been going, this ain't working. Give it up. Why are you doing this? Et cetera, et cetera. And she had the discipline to stick with it. And eventually, within a year or so, she didn't have tuberculosis anymore. And out of that movement came the, Napoleon Hill and Norman Vincent Peale and the sort of secular side of all of that said, you're poor because you think you are.
Yeah. Well, and the modern day, I mean, she died a few years ago, but the modern day version of that is Louise Hay.
Correct.
Is all about that. And it's all about blessing every organ and allowing your organs to be free and, all that other stuff. But, it's one thing to read it in a book and have a little slogan to say, oh, I allow my pancreas to be free. It's another thing to experience it and to deep with the emotional reality. I heard an interview with Bessel van der Kolk, who's we've all discussed, the body keeps the score. He said, it's so easy to, John mentioned it, it's so easy to shift into thought when you're faced with this stuff and not feel it, I just had a conversation with my 13-year-old daughter, Lolly, and she said, oh, I ate a lot today. And I said, why? And she said, well, I was bored and I was sad, so I ate. And I said, she said, don't say it. I know. She said, allow myself to be sad and allow myself to be bored, because we've had this conversation before. And I said, yeah, just, it's okay. It's fine. It's just part of life. It's not the end of the world, You're only trying to hide being sad and bored because you think it's not okay.
Right.
You know, and you eat to keep to shift the emotional, you know, to shift the emotional impact of it. So don't, you know, just sort of, it's okay. That's one of those things that, you know, you hope a few years from now, that's what he was talking about, you know?
I'd like to tell you,
Go ahead,
Ron,
John.
that those seeds that you plant in your children may wait till they pop up when they're 30, but they're there.
Oh, there.
My experience with my children is like, oh yeah, Dad said, I remember him saying, yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to deepen the point we were making just a few minutes ago about thinking and health, and picking up on Vanderkolk. It's my experience in life is that, and I think I'd like to circle back and see if this dovetails with what you're proposing in your own work, Ron, is that I now am concerned about, not concerned, but my focus is on general overall health, and not about a particular ailment or a particular this, that the foundation of the beauty of the rest of my life is in always pushing toward a conscious connection with that depth that you were talking about, that you found in your solar plexus. You know, we have different words, spirit, like you said, one, a higher power, whatever. That the health actually comes from being in that connection as consciously as possible, in as many hours of the day as possible. And what I learned from accountability from John's work is that anytime I notice that I'm not there is the perfect time to bring the notice back.
Yeah.
That now it's my practice to notice when I'm feeling lousy, I'm feeling out of sorts, or I'm thinking critical thoughts, or I'm feeling nasty in my mind, that, oh, here's an opportunity to refocus. The accountability practice allows me to do that by focusing on that feeling, and like you said, just allow it to be. And then in that energy, in that presence, ask myself, what do I want? And the truth is, I could want that. There are times when I do this work where I say, you know, I want to stay this way. I want to feel this way, because there's no wrong answer, like you were saying. It's whatever it is. But for me, the purpose is to go to consciousness, intentionality, and to find that over time, as I do this work, I have an alignment, not just between my mind and body, but between my soul, my mind, and my body. And the goal here is to have them all working in conscious alignment with one another, because it's really only one thing.
Yeah.
It's just the human mind that divides these things into these spheres and then says they're separate.
Right. I mean, I find with I've always been a mover. And so my particular way of doing this stuff usually has to do with some kind of actual physical stuff, you know. I love to exercise. I'm one of the rare people. I love to do yoga. I love to go to the gym, and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. But the way I practice, in the beginning, I didn't do this, but the way I practice, I mean, Iyengar, who was one of the people who brought yoga to the West, he died a few years ago at 95, fit as a fiddle up until he died, said that yoga is finding God in your body. You know, that's what the practice is. The practice of yoga is about finding God in your body. And if you practice it that way, you can find that, just like this somatic re-experience stuff, I can find that movement or yoga or physical sensation of one form or another, for me, is a great pathway to my emotional state. And Van der Kolk talks about this too. He talks about different disciplines of movement, whether they be dance or this, that, or the other thing, to untie some of the suppressed emotions that you know that are sitting there, that are unaccessible because the mind is saying no, you're not allowed to feel this stuff, you know. And movement can sometimes, for me anyway, can free those things up. I mean, in another somatic experience, you know, I had I had an appearance of my mother, which you know, she basically said, you know, who the fuck are you to want to live a long time and be a great dad, a great father to your kids, you know?
Wow.
You know, when I, you know, you big shot, who the fuck do you think you are? You know, when I checked out early, and, you know, and your dad checked out early, and, you know, and all this other stuff, and you had we had really hard lives, and we struggled, and blah, 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 blah. Who the fuck are you to think that you're not going to have a life like that? You know, so I can access stuff that way that I just don't seem to be able to otherwise. But everybody's got their own, you know, their own way of doing stuff. So. Anyway.
When you were talking about what your mother said, I had a mother similar to that. Who do you, fancy pants, kind of, who do you think you are?
Big shot.
Yeah, big shot. Yeah, you think you're better than everybody. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, which is what her saying, you think you're better than me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
You're not allowed to be. You're not allowed to be. You're not allowed to dream. You're not allowed to have dreams. You're not allowed to have, you know, want something. You're not allowed to want anything for yourself. That's what she was saying to me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Well, we find often when we do the accountability practice group process, we find often when people get to the state where they're in touch with the truth and they're having an emotional energy, their body is opening up to the truth, and then we ask them, what do you want? People go, I don't know what I want. As if there is indeed an internal censoring mechanism that says you can't want what you want. You can only want this twisted version of the reality that you're living, this traumatic version. Like you said, we had a hard life, and that's the best you can ever get. Well, that may be true, but it's also may not be true. And the only way to find out is to ask for something else.
What was a great line from that, what's that, Hans Zimmer book? You can't borrow God.
Right. You can't borrow another person's God.
You can't borrow God, and you have to, if you're gonna walk the walk, it's got to be your experience, not somebody else's. And ultimately, I mean, that's what, when we first met, that's what I brought home from the first time I met John. John, when you said, I hold value as a human being, it really, you know, it really struck me that no matter what you experience, you're okay, you know, accept what you're going through and don't fight it. Don't run away from it, and don't fight it, you know. That was great. That was just great. Those are the words I needed to hear back then. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome. And it's in my introduction, whenever a new person comes into the group, that I tell them you hold value as a human being. Yeah. And I started saying that in the institutions, and specifically Sacramento County Jail. And some of the men would just be moved to tears. And Yeah, yeah, because they've never heard it before. They have one of our mothers or their own mother in their head saying, "Stop that! You're
Yeah.
supposed, want what you're supposed to want. Be like everybody else. Be good." Yeah.
Well, the power, though, is that the reason why we're moved when we hear that is because somewhere deep underneath all that crap is the recognition that that's true. That
Yeah.
we came into this world in knowing this, but not consciously, but in our embodiment. We came into the world whole, complete, and perfect, as we like to say, but we didn't have the consciousness of that. So then everything that started to happen more or less started to press that information down.
Yeah.
So that by the time we came into consciousness at the age of 3 or 4, whenever the light went on for each of us, our thoughts had already been trained by our emotional response to all this trauma. And
Yeah.
so our mind was already trained. Our earliest thoughts were trained to reinforce this defense that was living in our emotional brain and our emotional configuration. And it takes an act of God, of grace, to be able to find the antidote. And so when someone says that to us for the first time, wherever the circumstance is, and we're actually open to hearing it, then of course we're going to be moved, because it's, again, the accountability practice is essentially about unlocking these emotional defense configurations that have kept us tied up in trauma and self-pity and all of those defensive behaviors that were designed to save us and keep us alive. And they did a great job, but they outran their usefulness, and it was already too late because they had trained our thinking, and then our thinking was something wrong with me. It's dangerous. I can't tell this person that. I got to keep the secret. All those things over and over and over and over again for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really for me, the power of this work is the knowledge that we all have access to the original truth, to the original health, to the original vitality. And that it just takes somebody, first of all, it takes me to be ready to hear it. And then it takes somebody else to just say it in a circumstance that is powerful. I mean, it's just, it's from a commonplace perspective, one would probably not predict that somebody in jail hearing some guy like John saying to you, your whole value as a human being, that would crack open this expression, but it does. Because
that's all they need to hear. Yeah.
My belief is everyone's ready to hear that, even though they may not be able to hear it.
Right.
They're wanting to hear it. We are wanting to hear it.
I mean, the other side of that is that as well, is that, is to acknowledge that there's a great part of us, what John calls it, the 7/8 or the 90% of us that we're not, that we're not in charge of.
Right.
That is really running the show, in much, and to acknowledge that part exists, that it's a benevolent part, it gives us life, it is the product of that single cell that we all used to be, that all the programs that are running us were contained in that single cell. It's just, a remarkable, sometimes I just sit back in awe of, like, how the fuck does that happen?
Right.
And it's the world where, to my point before, where biology and spirit and emotions and everything else mix in a way that science and medicine don't. I mean, they can follow the electrical impulses sometimes, but they don't have a fucking clue as to the actual, chemical mix of what happens in that world, we just don't know, the world of hormone, they can follow the pathways of certain things and saying this, hormone gets released, or this electrical stimulation happens, or the vagus nerve does this, or but there's a synergy there and an alchemy that we just don't know. What we do know is that it's one giant integrated ball that that functions on all levels at all times, you know. So
Western science is, of course, and no blame or judgment here, but Western science tends to be reductionistic, and tends to believe if we can just get down to the tiniest enough particle, we can find the truth particle. And of course, even if you could do that, what's missing is what you said, is that all these things are happening in this vast, interconnected, ever-moving, ever-changing, dynamic whole. And so if you can't grasp the whole as it's going on, then, you know, knowing about this one little thing might have some value. I don't want to deny that those things don't have value, but they don't tell us what's actually going on in this completeness and this integrated, dynamic, dancing experience that's always going on, and it's not capturable. And again, the reason why the accountability process is so useful to me is because it pulls me into the foundation of that, which is the feeling body. And because I can be in my thinking body, like you were saying earlier, Ron, I can be in my thinking body without thinking about it, ironically. But to be in my feeling body, I have to actually open my awareness to it, because in that 90%, right now, our bodies are doing all kinds of shit that we're not aware of. And it's just happening because it's programmed to do that. The blood is circulating, the nerve endings are carrying signals from all the skin and everything to the body, the digestion is occurring, all of that. And it's going on 24/7, like you said, without any conscious intervention whatsoever. So in order to feel, unless there's a real acute intervention of grief or fear, I have to pay attention. I have to choose to do that. But when I do, now that opens up the possibility of this integral awareness, body, mind, spirit, that otherwise is not accessible to us. And just like you were saying earlier about how as you read and study the physiology of aging, and you find very little understanding in the medical establishment that there's a body-mind connection, so too, John and I were talking about this the other day in the psychotherapeutic world. There's a similar ignorance of the relationship between emotion and thinking. And most psychotherapy is a talking cure. And again, I don't want to put down talking cures, but the talking cure is engaging the mind. And my mind is capable of talking around all kinds of stuff. Especially stuff that feels frightening to actually feel.
The better psychotherapists know that the words are leading to emotions, but many of them are just happy to hear the words. You're right. That's my experience anyway.
Or may have avoided that for themselves.
In
their own training. Again, I don't want to make any of it wrong, but I think back, I've been in therapy since I was 30. And it was only when I met John that I encountered anybody saying, "How do you feel?" Years and years and years of therapy. Again, I don't want to make any of it wrong. And I'm willing to suggest that I subconsciously chose people that would keep me protected from the things I was afraid to experience.
Yes, there is that.
For sure.
Oh, I'm in therapy. I'm nothing wrong with me.
I'm getting better.
My experience has told me, putting all this stuff together, that there is no time, there is no moment that I'm not in an emotional state. There are moments where I can deny the emotional state or distract from the emotional state. There's never a time I cannot be. And the energy I expended on suppressing or ignoring my emotional state, which takes energy, took from my vitality.
So.
So Ron, from your perspective, if somebody is talking to you, because you meet people all the time, and I know that you engage people in conversations, particularly our age group. I'm going to be 70 this year. Um, what is generally the thing people ask you about what you've learned in terms of
Well, most people just want to
this-
know most people just want to know diet and exercise routines.
Okay.
They think it's all that, you know, as soon as I get into the other aspects, they go, oh yeah, that's important too. But like, you know, what do you do? What do you eat? What do you, and you know, the eating part and the moving part is simple. You move more and eat less, and eat, you know, stuff that looks like food, you know, and smells like food, and is not made in a factory or comes in a box. You know, it's very simple. There's lots of people out there, you know, from Mark Hyman to a guy named Walter Longo, and there's tons of, you know, diet books and health diet things. You know, they all say the same thing. You know, eat natural foods. Everybody's got different, you know, tastes and different intolerances and all kinds of other stuff. So you got to find something that works. Exercise. We don't move enough in our daily lives in modern world at all. And I'm not talking about just a walk, an hour a day of walking or something like that. I'm talking about getting blood into every pore of your body with something intensive, you know. You know, it's yoga, weights, you know, there's all kinds of stuff, you know, even dancing, and, you know, there's all kinds of, and there, you know, some of it's also ancient things, you know, the ancient, some of the traditional ancestral practices of Indians and African tribes and things like that, that was all spiritual movement, you know. But the real thing is the stuff we've been talking about. There's this wonderful study called the Longevity Project, and it tracked people for most of the 20th century. It started and stopped, but they filled in the gaps, and the surprising thing they found out about longevity and activity and the quality of later life was resilience. And it's the kind of thing, exactly what we're talking about. It's the challenge of when life knocks you down, you pick yourself up and you find a way through it, you know? And these were people who ended up living fairly quiet, long lives, but they had a reason to get up out of bed every morning, you know? They had a passion, you know? And the Japanese call it ikigai, you know, different cultures call it different stuff, but it was a reason to stay alive, you know. It was a reason and that reason can be the reason that you practice better dietary and movement practices too, you know. You say, I realize that all three things are interrelated. So, that's sort of the overview of what I would tell somebody. I would urge anybody to start as early as possible on this quest, you know, for a healthy, longer, later life, because the body does start depleting itself without, you know, the right stuff. So lots of people I know who are our age at 70, they're not moving very well anymore. And once you stop moving, you know, you're all kinds of things, you know, you got medical treatment starts taking up time in your life, and your fear of falling starts taking up time in your life, and, you know, all kinds of other stuff. I shun as much medical treatment as possible. I don't want to be on pills. I don't want to have surgery. I try to do things naturally. And I'm sure there'll come a time when I can avoid that. As a matter of fact, I've had a couple of things I've had to have done medically, a heart arrhythmia and some other stuff. But you know, a lot of this stuff can be done using the body, you know,
Yeah.
and all the resources that the body has, mind, spirit included, you know. So, but it's an amazing journey, you know. I just would, you know, I don't know what the timing is if we're gonna, but just to say that this is without a doubt the sweetest time of my life. And I just saw a survey. They said peak happiness happens around 82 years old. Now,
I'm looking
why would
forward to
somebody
that.
who's 82 be happier than when they were 40?
Mhm.
You know, well, you learn to, you know, this is such an incredible time of life of putting things together and having perspective and having wisdom and having, you know, and if we can just hold on to our health, it becomes an incredible time to be alive. So.
Yeah.
You know, there's something that's occurred to me again. You and I have talked about this, Ron, but I'd love to get your thoughts, and John, you as well. I think it's also been important for me to be willing to die, to be willing to accept that this individual life will come to an end. And I spent a lot of psychic energy worrying about dying. And it's like, you know, part of that wisdom is acceptance, accepting that certain things are immutable. Not many things, but certain things are immutable, and just let go of that and focus on the present moment. This is the moment I have. One day, a moment I'll have will be a moment of dying. But until that time, this is what I get to do.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
It's scary. It's scary. I mean, when I started out, that's what pushed me, the fear of dying. I said, holy shit, there's going to be a time when I am no longer me. I will not be a presence on this planet. And but you know, but there again, all the things that we've just been talking about, you can't run away from that fear.
Mhm.
Feel it and say, okay, even if I'm going to be afraid of it for the rest of my life, I'm not going to, it's just going to be there, you know, it's just going to be there. So it's there with me, you know, I'm afraid of it. You know, it gets me going.
I think it was Mark Twain said, I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens.
Yeah, if it's any consolation, you won't be aware. Yeah, you won't be aware of being dead.
Yeah. So it's one of the things from the Native American tradition is to make friends with death today so that you live fully in the moment.
I love that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, we are coming up on the end of our time together, our hour.
Okay.
And so before we wrap up, I'd like to ask Ron if you have any last minute thoughts that you'd like to share with us. Does your book have a title yet?
It's called A Life Yet to Live.
Nice.
And it's all about finding love, joy, health, and just about everything else in later life.
Yeah.
So it's you know, I'm hoping to get it it's almost done for the third time. And I have to say, every time I rewrite it, it hopefully becomes better, clearer, more concise, whatever. I've been working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
But this is the one, this is the version that's going to go out and hopefully make it. It originally began as a letter to my daughters. This is what your father did. This is what your father has spent the last, many years of his life doing. So we'll see.
Thanks, Ron.
Sure.
John,
Thank you.
any last minute thoughts?
That was powerful. Thank you, Ron, for sharing all that with us. It was very powerful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we can do this again.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, we can do it again when we're pretty close. I think Marty will be 99 and you and I will be 100, maybe 100.
Okay.
We'll come
I'm
back
happy to do
together
that.
and chop it
Yes.
up. See what we get to
We'll
sit
have
down.
done many more in the meantime.
Yeah. Very good.
Well, Ron Kastner in Manhattan, thank you very much for your time and wisdom. John
Thank
Donovan,
you.
visiting Sacramento, thank you for your time together here. I've had a great opportunity to be with you and break bread and actually break tortillas, and look forward to the next one. Thanks, gentlemen.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.